Hey, what's going on guys, and welcome back to another video. As much as we all love the convenience of backwards compatibility, there's something truly nostalgic about firing up a game on your trusty old Xbox 360. This time around, I picked 7 games that never received the backwards compatibility treatment, meaning they're essentially still stuck in 7th gen. Now you may think that I should have chosen 7 of the best games, but what's the fun in that? And it's not every day I get to discuss games not even close to hitting the 7 out of 10 mark. Because let's be honest, some games just don't quite stack up. Having said that, I still believe there's value in playing mediocre games. Sometimes you gotta experience them to truly appreciate the good games. If you've been following the channel, you know we enjoy collecting unique imports and region-specific releases. Once again, I'll be including those in this list. And if you're new here and enjoy what we do, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a like. So let's check out the games. Up first, we have Brink. Now, Brink was developed by Splash Damage and published by Bethesda in 2011. I remember when this was announced, there was a lot of hype surrounding this game. It was just this multiplayer game that was trying to be kind of like a Team Fortress 2 in a sense, and please don't be offended by me making that association because I know a lot of people loved Team Fortress 2. And I really like that game as well. But that's kind of the look they were going for, the objective-based missions, and they had some weird parkour thing. They were they were trying to really promote this parkour thing that, in my opinion, didn't work very well. And I actually recently played this game, maybe a couple of years ago. So I definitely didn't jump on the wagon when this came out. But it was an interesting one nonetheless because, like I said, I think a lot of people did play it, but I think the player base dropped off pretty quickly after that. But for me, like what kind of was the downside to this game, not only having to play against bots, which are very inconsistent. It's probably one of the worst AIs, because whenever you do the objective-based stuff, you tend to go towards the objective, and if you are getting close to being done and finishing that mission, the AI just ramps up like crazy and you die all the time. Like, it's so unbalanced. I didn't in general have a very good time with this. Obviously, like I said, I played this pretty recently, so me and a buddy, we were just kind of tackling the achievements and playing through this game, and neither of us had a good time. I think he rated this game even lower than me. So I like I said, this is probably like pretty average, mediocre game for me. I think he probably rated it like like a 2 out of 10 or something. But it was promising, I will say. But it almost feels like, when I capture gameplay for this too, you feel like you're almost, as you're sprinting, you almost feel like you're going backwards. Like, it's the weird feeling like you're stuck in honey or like molasses or whatever. And also, just in general, it's just not a very interesting game. It's sort of, it doesn't even have a real campaign. So it just more has multiplayer and online components, but then it makes it seem like it is like a campaign, which is very shallow in my opinion. So, and not to single out another game like that, but I know people love Titanfall, but that's kind of similar to what I felt about Titanfall, although that was clearly a much better game. But I don't tend to like games that pretend to have a single-player campaign hidden behind multiplayer, because in my opinion, that doesn't fool anyone. So if you then don't have a player base that you're banking on getting through these games, then you're just not going to get a game at all. So I think that's ultimately what happened here. It's just really, in my opinion, poor AI. It felt unpolished. They kind of hyped it a little bit too much, and there wasn't really a lot of content in this game, I feel. Although this game, the NTSC version, at least in the PAL, did get a DLC added to it with more missions and stuff, but ultimately it just wasn't enough, really. So for me, this was like a one experience kind of game, and we'll see if I'll ever play it again. I'm leaning towards not, but never say never. So I mean, I do like the look of this game, and then obviously when you go to game stores, this one really stands out on the shelf, especially for the spine and the slipcover if you can find it. And this is a very cheap game as well. I would be surprised if this was more than $5. Never really know the 360 market though, but this is at most like $7-8. And this is the Japanese version of Brink. It looks very similar. But I actually captured gameplay with this for this video, and the game is almost entirely in Japanese. There's some English text. When you load up the game, you're going to get Japanese voiceover and subtitled in Japanese as well. And this version right here did not have DLC, so this is just 1,000 gamer score for this one. But it is an interesting one, so like I've said before as well, if you watched our videos, I really like collecting for the different releases, different imports and variants. Nonetheless, I mean, it's great to have it in the collection, but very mediocre game. The next game is Turning Point Fall of Liberty. This was developed by Spark Unlimited, published by Codemasters, and released in 2008. Now, Turning Point had a pretty cool concept, actually. So kind of think of Man in the High Castle. So it's kind of the scenario, alternate history of if the Nazis won World War II and invaded the US. So it had a good starting point, I feel. But what really comes down to it, like, this is probably one of the worst shooters I've played. Like, just the gameplay is not great. Most times when you fire a gun, or whatever gun you pick up, really, it just doesn't feel like it's hitting anything. You just kind of spray and pray. And it's one of those games that you'll notice the later you get in the game, and especially if you play on the harder difficulties. I do recall that if you go for achievements in this one, I think you have to do 3 different playthroughs, and the harder one, it's not hard for the sake of being hard, it's just because the controls are not very good, and it makes it very frustrating. And at the same time, the checkpoints a lot of times are not great either. But it's just, like I said, it was competing with a lot of stuff around that time. So 2008, we had a lot of good shooters. You know, we had Halo 3 at that point. You had Gears of War 2, Battlefield Bad Company, right? So everyone was jumping on this train to make a first-person shooter. And this felt, again, very unpolished, very rushed, you know, and again, trying to compete with Call of Duty, and it's just very difficult, especially Codemasters. I don't think they had a lot of shooters at that time. It was more racing games they made, I feel. But again, just really poor controls, very clunky, and repetitive too. It just wasn't very interesting progressing in this game. You'll probably notice that from the gameplay. When I went to record this, the AI is all over the place. Like, sometimes they're smart, most times they're pretty dumb. So it's, again, in a shooter, as you know, if the AI is really bad, then it makes it very boring to play as well. So but otherwise, yeah, it's one of those games, I think, that if you really want to experience a very mediocre or below shooter from that 360 era, this is definitely a game to try, at least, you know, but don't expect a whole lot from it. And this is probably a game that you've seen in game stores and most likely passed up on about 50 times because you were playing Call of Duty or Battlefield or something at the time. Then it totally makes sense. But this was kind of one that came and went. But it wasn't really until later on that I decided to pick it up and give it a try. And this is the German version, but this is actually a combined release in Canada, Germany, and France. So it's probably one of the more unique releases that I own. This is the German one, though, that I bought from Germany, from German eBay. So again, has my favorite diamond, the USK diamond there, the rating. And it was pretty easy to get this one, but you kind of have to know which version you're looking for in that case. So like I said, there's like 3 different ones of this one. And just for good measure, I'll show the French one too, which I'm not 100% sure if this is the French one, but the back artwork and the back of the cover, the manual, as you'll see here. As you'll see, the manual is in French here, but the disc is entirely the same as the German one. So it has that diamond again. So again, I can't 100% confirm if this is the French one, but I have it in the collection. I ended up with 2 of them just in case. But yeah, that's Turning Point Fall of Liberty. Again, not the best shooter in the world, but, you know, it's relatively collectible if you can find it, and it should be very cheap still. The next game is Kane and Lynch Dead Men. This was developed by IO Interactive, published by Eidos Interactive, and released in 2007. So Kane and Lynch will really forever, for me, be kind of a fascinating game. And it's one of those where I have played Oddly enough, Kane and Lynch 2, I completed that one. I did all the achievements and stuff. But it's just, again, one of those shooters around that time that tried to be something else. Because IO, as you probably know, they made the Hitman games. Hitman is one of my favorite series of all time. And this, for me, didn't quite live up to that expectation that I had of that developer. And I know they weren't trying to make a Hitman game. This is more like a, I don't even know if you want to call it a buddy shooter, but, you know, it's two criminals basically on the run. And it's very violent, right? It's a lot of killing and running away from cops and killing cops. And so, but it's you can do local multiplayer or local co-op in this one. So I haven't actually tried that yet, but I don't know who I would invite over to play this crazy game with me. So, because Kane and Lynch 2 had online co-op, and that's why I played with a buddy of mine. And again, it was the same buddy that played Brink with me, so you can imagine we had a great time with all these awesome games, these awesome shooters. So it's very hectic, chaotic, and controls were very clunky in this one too. So it's like a theme of this video, I feel like. Everything really comes down to the controls for me in shooters. And if the controls are very clunky, the cover mechanics are also very awkward. And also if the AI is really all over the place, then, you know, and I understand AI is very difficult to get right in a game. But to just kind of spawn out of nowhere, get stuck behind their cars, and then you have to kind of wait until they maybe come out of cover. And so, yeah, I wasn't quite on board with this one. I've only played the beginning stages of this game, so I can't give it a full rating. I feel that would be a little bit unfair, but I have played Kane and Lynch 2, and if a sequel in a sense isn't going to be a very enjoyable experience, then it's hard to imagine this one being anything different than that. But there's a huge fan base for this game, and it's probably one of the most notorious games in terms of Xbox achievements. There were a lot of fragile alliances with this game, but I think that kind of took away from the fact that it was a pretty average game. You know, I think it could have been much better. A lot of people played the multiplayer though, so that was definitely a big selling point for them. It did have DLC as well that was free, I believe, before the store shut down. So if you didn't grab that one, obviously then you might not be able to complete this game all the way, but it is a very difficult one to complete to begin with. But, you know, if you are looking for someone who has a dark humor, I guess, and likes violent shooters, and they can come over to your house and play local co-op, I think this would be a game you could probably try out. But for me, this didn't really live up to any kind of expectation I would have of IO Interactive, because, like I said, they're one of my favorite devs. But I think they should just stick to making Hitman, and which obviously they did. Because I think now Square Enix still owns the rights to Kane and Lynch, and I think we can all imagine that Square Enix would probably never make a game like this. Now, this game you've probably seen all over the place, and I think I picked this up from a GameStop a long time ago, and didn't know much about the game. I did know Eidos from the Tomb Raider days, and I knew IO Interactive from Hitman. So it wasn't a game that I picked up because I wanted to play it. It was more, this looks interesting, but I knew nothing about it. But it wasn't until many years later that I actually gave it a try. And here is the Japanese version of Kane and Lynch. And again, similar to Brink, when I booted this up to capture some gameplay, this game was also entirely in Japanese with some English text, but most of it was in Japanese. As we can see here, like the disc again is that kind of gray metallic look to it, and it has a different artwork on the front as well. And this one was a little bit harder to find, actually. I think I still bought this online, but when we went to Japan, I only saw this maybe once. So it may not be as common as you would think. And then you don't have DLC for the Japanese one. But again, all the same stuff applies. And then it actually had a third release as well, a Games for Windows Live version as well. So the next game on the list is Soldier of Fortune Payback. This was developed by Cauldron, published by Activision, and released in 2007. Everyone's favorite shooter year, it seems. So, I don't know if I already used up my worst shooter card by now, but this is definitely up there. I know this series kind of goes back a little bit. I know there was at least one game on OG Xbox that I never played, but I decided to give this one a try for whatever reason. This is really, again, and like I said, it's published by Activision that publishes Call of Duty, obviously. Totally different team, though. And this game was really known for being incredibly gory. So you had dismemberments and just crazy stuff in this one, to the point where I'll get to the physical of the next one here. But it was... Yeah, basically, you can dismember legs, limbs, all that kind of stuff, right? And I don't even fully remember if you had like slow-mo and stuff like that. But it's supposed to be kind of fast-paced shooter with lots of explosions. It really looks very dated to me. Like when I played this game, I was like, this is 2007. I played it obviously much later, but you still have like graphics of OG Xbox, and it didn't look very good. Very brown game, very brown and gray, not very exciting. Not great controls, really bad AI, and repetitive levels. So it's just kind of, they try to make it feel like an old school first-person shooter in a sense. But, you know, if you compare it to something like Call of Duty, it's never going to hold up. And even as an alternative, if you were waiting for the next Call of Duty game, then you can play this one. But it came out the same year as Modern Warfare, I think. So, yeah, it was a very difficult sell. I don't know what Activision was thinking at the time. But, yeah, I guess for the most sadistic person out there, this was probably a fun game to have something different where they try to have limbs flying everywhere, and which isn't something new. A lot of games do that, but it's very over the top, obviously, and it almost felt like they did the settings for a PC, but then they forgot to change the mouse sensitivity on the right stick. So like your movements are just, again, all over the place with your aiming, and maybe I'm just bad at this game. I have no idea. I played a lot of first-person shooters. This one is something that you have to get used to, it being very blocky and very choppy, and it's it's a very strange one, but that's really all I can say. I think this one might be up there with Turning Point as some of the worst. Yeah, I know some of you, if you play this, you'll probably say that this is an okay game and an okay shooter, but for me, just this didn't really satisfy me as a FPS fan. This was a very underwhelming experience for me. And I'm not sure how well this sold, because it came out the same year as Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. And then, as you can see at the top there, I find it very interesting. It was a very big warning sign there, violent subject matter and low violence option available, and which you'll see here in the next version here. This is the NTSC, of course, so this is just a normal version of the game. Very strange decision by Activision to release this the same year as one of their flagship series. But I guess it was for people who couldn't play Call of Duty. I have no idea. This is a much more violent game. So that's the NTSC version. And here we have the Australian version of it. This is a PAL version. And this was very stripped down. I have played this version right here. And they didn't even give you the low violence option. They completely took out all the dismemberment. So it is a little bit strange to play this one, because you feel that if you play the regular version and then you kill enemies in this one, they just kind of fall flat. So it's very strange. It's a very strange feeling to play this game, but this is a pretty high rating, obviously, in Australia. And then I never understood this too. Like, I ordered this from Australia, and it has that sticker on the manual. I took it off. It still looks like crap. But it was an interesting story with this one too, is that I messaged a seller on eBay that had this listed, of course, and I asked them, can you ship this to the United States? And because I knew there were some issues with this particular version, like I mentioned in other videos with the German one where they would swap the discs out. This would also happen here, where people would put the PAL version from UK or something in the cover or in the case. And so I messaged them saying, okay, can I get some extra pictures? Make sure that it has the MA 15 plus on there, and that was all good. But I love the fact that when they were ready to ship it to me, they gave me options, and it was like very expensive, 3 to 5 days getting there by air. And then the lowest option was boat, 2 months, and I just like, okay, I guess I won't take a boat option for 2 months, but that was very fascinating. Like, it's a story to tell for the ages, and I should do that sometime. If I don't need a game right away, I'll just choose the 2-month boat option. I think that would be fun. And as you can see here, the spine is like sun bleached to hell and back, so I don't even know. Maybe it did end up on that boat, but they just didn't tell me. And I just lost track of it. I forgot, and then it showed up, and I was like, oh, look. it finally arrived. So it is a very interesting one, but if you can get your hands on it, like, I still say give it a try. I don't think it's a very good shooter, but you can still experience a very different shooter from the typical Call of Duties. And continuing on here, not a shooter this time, but this is Alone in the Dark. This was developed by Eden Games, published by Atari, and released in 2008. So Alone in the Dark, I did actually play the first Alone in the Dark. I can't remember when, but I also bought, I think it was called New Nightmare or something. I think I played it on PC, and I really liked the Alone in the Dark games. Again, that's kind of the path that I went down. I didn't do Resident Evil or Silent Hill, so this kind of became my survival horror series back then. No particular reason, really. Maybe I just liked the title. I have no idea. But, you know, again, this was kind of like a reimagining of the series. I don't know if you can call it a reboot even, but again, they try to do something different here. They still had the survival horror elements, but then in some levels you sort of have like this open world gameplay. You can drive cars and whatever else. And it's supposedly it was pretty ambitious for the time, but you know, if you played this a little bit later on, you will know that, again, the controls, for me at least, very clunky again. Very difficult because they try to do kind of like a mix of tank controls and first person and this inventory system on your body. And those, to me, it didn't quite work as much as I wanted to, because I was actually looking forward to playing this game, and I bought this one probably a long time before I played it. It's one of those things that every single year around Halloween I tell myself I should go back and finish Alone in the Dark. I've done maybe like half the game now, and it's very tough to get into because of the controls. So like every time I put it down, I just dread going back relearning the controls, and you can probably see it in some of the gameplay too. So it just wasn't as fun. And I know some people will again probably say that this was a really good game and they really enjoyed it. I totally get it. Even if you're not a fan of Alone in the Dark from way back, you know, because we know that this is kind of the grandfather of survival horror. You know, it came out before Resident Evil and Silent Hill. So yeah, I don't know what really particularly didn't work for me, because first of all, I think it was weird that at least in the global version it has James McCaffrey, which is Max Payne. He voiced Edward Carnby. And I think shortly before this game came out, wasn't there like a weird movie with like Christian Slater as well? So I feel like they were like totally butchering Alone in the Dark in like the mid 2000s there. You know, again, maybe I didn't quite know what to expect with this one, but for me, first thing, controls just didn't work. And maybe I just don't like tank controls, or but who does really? Who likes awkward controls? I would love to know that, because it's the number one thing in gaming for me. If the controls suck, the game sucks. I mean, it's got to be number one. So you can forgive a lot of other things, but this is a game that yes, it's 2025. I have about 10 months to decide if I should play this and finish this game this year. But who knows? I might. But for me, this was very mediocre. And here is Alone in the Dark Soundtrack Edition. And I actually traded this in about 3 times before I eventually ended up again with the Soundtrack Edition. Don't ask me why. I just had the regular one with no soundtrack disc, but I felt like, okay, I might as well have like the alternate version of this game. I don't know. I think the PS3 had a pretty cool one. I think it was called like the Inferno or something. I don't know if the game is any different, but it's a cool title nonetheless. But this is the Soundtrack Edition, the NTSC version at least. And then we also have the Japanese release. And similar to the last 2 that I talked about, I booted this game up to capture some gameplay, and this was also voiced all in Japanese, and the text was in Japanese as well. So it's an interesting one if you wanted to stack these games. And I will point out, this is probably the coolest disc that I have so far. Like, I just opened this case and I was like, wow, this disc is actually pretty cool. And I had to inspect it a little bit further here. But yeah, just again, this one might have gone up in price since the new Alone in the Dark came out. I haven't played the new one either, but maybe it's just like one of those blocks I have that I can't treat myself to a new game, the new Alone in the Dark, until I finish this one. But one day I will conquer this awkward game. And the next game is Conflict Denied Ops. This was developed by Pivotal Games, published by Eidos, and released in 2008. So Conflict Denied Ops is kind of like a tactical shooter, so to speak, and then you control two different characters, so you can switch between the two. You could also play local co-op in this one as well, but I think they were trying to be kind of like a Ghost Recon Rainbow Six type of game here. And first and foremost, I think there was like a Conflict series earlier on. I don't know if that was like PlayStation or on OG Xbox, PS2, whatever it was. But this wasn't a new entry or anything, but I do think this probably was the last one for a good reason. I think the graphics, first and foremost, just to capture gameplay here, I thought this was like an early PS2 game. I couldn't believe this was an Xbox 360 game from 2008. So, I mean, maybe we've advanced a lot since then in the graphics department, but this game is pretty ugly. I know that a lot of people don't have a problem with graphics, like they just play it. Again, gameplay is the most important. Graphics come second. But again, it's just very awkward controls, clunky, just didn't really work out well for a tactical shooter, because there's other tactical shooters here that I think would be much better than this. And like I mentioned, Ghost Recon Rainbow Six, you also have Brothers in Arms, I think would be a better alternative to something like this. But it had some cool moments. I like to be able to switch between characters. So if you, let's say you died with one, you can switch to the other and revive the other character, you know. So obviously they were trying to mimic having a local co-op partner for this, you know. So but I know that you can obviously just play it with two controllers, and then you can just do most of the work yourself for those local co-op achievements. But that sounds like a pain and not very fun. The good thing is, though, we get to enjoy this game 3 times, like a lot of achievement hunters have done. And this also notoriously has one of the buggiest, weirdest, like 16-player achievements and stuff. And if this ever had a community, I'd love to know that, if anyone played this game back in 2008. But I know for a fact that even if I didn't play a lot of these games when they came out in the, you know, mid to late 2000s there, or approaching the 2010s, I should say, most of these shooters kind of died out pretty quickly. They all try to have the multiplayer component, and no one could compete with Halo Gears and Call of Duty, so it was very difficult. But they all wanted to have it for some reason. And I know I played some of these games when they came out, and they died quickly. You had like 4 people online, and it was no way to get 16 people in one lobby at one time. Very buggy game, not a great shooter at all. So let's start with the NTSC version of Conflict Denied Ops. I think this is a pretty common game still, though. I don't think I've never seen this one in stores, and you can probably find this very cheap online as well. I think this one, though, finding it in good condition was the biggest challenge for me, really, here as a game collector. But, you know, obviously I did find it, and you can always swap things out, of course, if you don't find it in one go. And the next one here is the German release, and as you can see, it has that red diamond again. This one was a little bit harder to find for those reasons I mentioned before, that they tend to swap the disc out with a different PAL disc that does not have that rating on it. But I was eventually able to get it. It's a little bit harder to get it now, I feel, unless a US seller or someone else in Europe sell it directly to you, then it's a little bit harder to find this one. But again, the same cover and everything, it's just different rating and a different achievement list. And lastly, this got a third release. So this is Double Clutch. That's what it was called in Japan. And it has a totally different cover, totally different artwork. So this one would have fooled me. I had to ask someone, like, what is Conflict Denied Ops called in the Japanese version? And it's Double Clutch. And it looks like almost the picture is like from behind, as you can see on the other two. But again, that metallic disc. And so yeah, that's, if you ever were looking to get all 3 of these, that's the name of the Japanese one. So it probably wouldn't have guessed it, because when I searched eBay, I was not able to find it. And that's how I did it. But, you know, again, it is a shooter, and that's all I have to say. And the last game on the list is Wanted Weapons of Fate. This was developed by Grin, published by Warner Brothers, and released in 2009. So I actually really enjoyed the Wanted movie, and this is naturally based on that movie. And Interesting thing about this developer, in the year 2009, they made 3 games, and it just stands out to me, and that's why I have to mention it. They made 3 games that year, and I don't know if they made a whole lot of games before or after this, but they did Bionic Commando for the 360, they did this game, and they did Terminator Salvation. All which I would consider not top-notch games. I think probably Wanted is the best of the 3, because I will cut this one some slack. I know it's probably pretty repetitive when you think about it. I think it is a pretty short game as well. So anything that's based on a movie is going to lack a little bit of depth to it. But I think as a fan of the movie, I really enjoyed this game, actually. So to call it mediocre is probably still appropriate. But in relation to the other games I talked about, this one probably ranks a little bit higher than them. So maybe I'll give this one a 6 out of 10 if I'm feeling very generous today. But it has a really cool bullet curve mechanic, actually, that you kind of learn after the first couple of tutorials and stuff. So you can naturally take advantage of that quite a bit. So it gets a little bit, I wouldn't say repetitive there, but it's a little bit easier because you just kind of stay in cover and then curve your bullets to people that are behind cover. So, but it's a cool mechanic. I can't deny it. And it's pretty fast paced, I would say, too. It's not your typical third-person shooter, cover shooter in a sense, but obviously around that time, that's where everyone wanted to be. Either a first-person shooter, like I've mentioned already, or like the Gears of War third-person cover shooter, right? So it's a very short story mode, and there's nothing else. There's no multiplayer or anything like that. But again, it's yeah, it can remind you of a couple of different games, and I wouldn't bring in Max Payne or Stranglehold because they're almost full on like slow motion type games. But this one you do have some slow motion in it. Like if you blind fire, it kind of stops time a little bit, so you can flank the enemy, especially the ones that have shields. Like I said though, like the really big selling point is the bullet curving skill that you have. I think even on the higher difficulties too, you can still spam it to some degree where it makes things a lot easier. But for a movie tie-in, I will say it's not the worst game you'll play. It is enjoyable for that duration that I mentioned. So, but again, it probably is overall mediocre though, but better than some of the other games I mentioned so far. Of course, we have the NTSC version here of the game. And I'm not sure if I would have picked this game up if I didn't know the movie. I will be perfectly honest there. Like I saw this a bunch of times in game stores, and I don't know how common this game is anymore. But I'm sure there were plenty of releases, so if you wanted to pick this one up and play it, then I'm sure you will have no problems finding it. But it's one of those games that I probably would have passed up on if I didn't know anything about the movie. And there was also a German release for this, and again, it's the return of the giant diamond from Saints Row 2, so they just plastered this one over it too. And I did load this one up. I used this one to capture some gameplay and wanted to see how that one was. I've only played the global version of this yet. I have not fully played the German one, but I think the audio, the voiceover was in English, but everything else was in German. So, and again, a version that's relatively easy to find once you know what you're looking for, of course, because you still have to get your hands on it and message the right seller that will ship it over to the US. And then lastly, we had also a Japanese version of this game. Again, this one was one that I bought many years ago just because I knew that I'd played the NTSC version, and I found out it had 2 other releases with separate achievements and everything. So I haven't played this Japanese one either, and I think the achievements are pretty much the same though. But they probably had to censor something in here and cater it to the Japanese market. But there's Wanted Weapons of Fate. So I will say probably of all the games I mentioned today, this is probably one that you'll have a little bit more fun with, because I do feel like the controls are at least good in this game. That was it for this video. I hope you enjoyed and found it helpful. Whether you want to collect and play these games in your own region, this stack right here is most likely going to be for you. But if you want more achievements and collect cool imports, you can of course get whichever ones you want. These are certainly not the most expensive games out there, but I feel like they're often overlooked. Let me know in the comments what you think about the games that I talked about today. Even if some of these are your favorites, I'd like to know that as well. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep the 360 dream alive.